This video is by Dr. Peggy Symingson at the University of Texas at Arlington, and it focuses on phonics and word study principles for teaching emergent and beginning readers, and it's based on research and some prominent scholars in the literacy field. So in this video, one of the objectives is learning the definition of some key terms associated with phonics and word study instruction. You'll also develop some of your expertise in some of the research base of principles of teaching phonics, as well as learn about some of the prominent scholars who I will cite throughout this presentation. And you'll also be able to identify and look further into some applications to classroom or home instruction in teaching about letters and sounds and early literacy relating to phonics. And some optional resources like websites are included throughout the video. And just as a note, this video is intended to be just a brief overview with some key points, and it does not include all knowledge about understanding of teaching phonics. So it's brief and just hits on some key points for you to think about and consider. Okay, let's get into the research by Marilyn Adams. What do we need to know? She says in her book, Beginning to Read, Thinking and Learning About Print, that phonics is necessary, but the debate about phonics has emerged over time as to when to begin instruction and how much instruction to use with children or adults who struggle with reading. The focus here is generally just on beginning reading. And she says, we want to know when and in what order and through what materials and procedures this instruction can be most effectively achieved. And so she has this analogy that phonics or code instruction is like a nutrient that is part of a balanced diet. And so moving on, Stephen Stahl has some key points, some of which I identify here. This is an article from the Reading Teacher, a great journal for practitioners and researchers to keep up with the field of elementary literacy, early literacy to about 6th grade. So these concepts focus on a few key ideas. The first is really important, and that it is that phonics instruction builds on the idea of phonemic awareness, or the skill that children have, and it's always something that begins at the auditory level of hearing and manipulating the smallest units of sound in a word. So the ability, for instance, to blend and segment or stretch apart the sounds in words. Students also bring to bear their knowledge of concepts about print, so the idea that print conveys meaning, or that text conveys meaning, and that we use it in books, and it's in the environment, and that books are read left to right, generally in English, etc. And this idea of the concept of a letter and the concept of a word. These are really crucial foundations for learning to read. Another key point Stephen Stahl makes is that phonics instruction should be done using language that is direct and clear to the students. Another key point we need to keep in mind is phonics is always part of a larger reading program. It's not an end in itself. Students need to practice in reading, writing, spelling, etc. as part of a larger reading program. And finally, another key point from this article, although there are more than this, you might want to check it out on your own, is this idea that phonics instruction has a goal of working towards automaticity with word recognition. And we know that automaticity builds fluency in reading, which really moves students through into becoming transitional and fluent readers. So some key points. Applications. So what does this mean for teaching? We need to integrate reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And one way we can do that is encourage young children or emergent and beginning readers to use writing. And in their early attempts at writing, they can use invented spelling. And so they're using phonemic awareness skills to, hear sounds and to write down those approximations of what they hear. So you can say things like, what sounds do you hear? And stretch it out, as opposed to sound it out, because not all words are decodable or regular. So stretching it out is probably a better thing to say to children. And just a quote saying that children work towards conventional spelling, but that they have a temporary logic in the invented spelling. So this quote kind of points us towards a rationale for invented spelling, but there is research by Reed and cited by Adams as well that supports the idea of using invented spelling and writing to enhance phonics. So moving on, two more applications we can look into and find resources for are first making words, where students can use some pre-selected letters selected by the teacher, and the teacher guides students in making or blending the words together. Usually they're decodable or CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant words. They can also have different phonics patterns. You can work towards that. There are books that have ready-made lessons for making words. So you might look into books by Patricia Cunningham for examples and instances of making words as an activity. And it's usually small group instruction, so you can monitor and give corrective feedback to students and positive reinforcement as they work towards reading and making words. And then word sorts is something students can do where they sort for phonics patterns, and excuse my typo, for phonics patterns. And this can also be done virtually, so there's a web link to EduPlace where students can sort words and put them in different columns. And you can do follow-up activities where students use the word in a sentence, read and write with the word, etc. So there's some extension activities for both making words and word sorts that contextualize the learning. Okay, Elkonin boxes have been used. There are also sound boxes, and again, reinforcing this idea of using writing to reinforce the letter-sound relationships in phonics. So for instance, if a student were writing and they wanted to spell the word sheep, you can draw these boxes quickly or train the students to do that, and then you can say, what sounds do you hear at the beginning? Sheep. And they might know that that's the digraph SH, and they could write SH in the first box, and similarly ask them, what do you hear in the middle? Sheep. And they write EE, or what sound they hear. It might be the letter E, it might be a similar sound letter that makes that sound, and then in the end you say, what do you hear at the end? What's the final sound? Sheep. And they can write the letter P if they know it. So you help the child identify the beginning, middle, and final sounds by stretching the word and putting what sounds they hear inside the boxes. And a good way to start this is with words with two phonemes. So you can work with two phonemes, and then students can work with words with three phonemes. Something else to keep in mind is that we don't want to teach phonics in isolation. So Dorothy Strickland, in a recent book called Teaching Phonics Today, published by IRA, or International Reading Association, is this idea of whole part whole. And so, for instance, you could read a book that emphasizes a certain phonic sound, and then look closely, like by listing words on the board or in a pocket chart, look at the parts of the written text. So zoom in and analyze those words, and then connect back to the whole, connecting what was learned about in the analysis with the larger text. And so one example I thought of was a book, Sheep in a Jeep, which focuses on the digraph SH and the sh sound, which is repeated throughout the book. And so you could focus in on that and circle SH and analyze that and discuss it, and then revisit it and say, okay, I'm going to read it again, and raise your hand when you hear the word sheep, and maybe hold up the word sheep. So the language is learned in context of a storybook or a song or a poem or a rhyme, something that's authentic and builds on their oral language and real reading. Some more tips from Strickland for beginning and emergent readers are you can use letters that are very personable and meaningful to the child, like start with some letters that are in their name so that they recognize those letters and make a connection to them. And a lot of teachers in early childhood classrooms will start their word walls by putting up and displaying the children's names. And also just simple things like singing the alphabet song, as well as reading and having in the classroom alphabet books. My favorite is Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. And just Google ABC books or alphabet books, or ask your children's librarian for titles, or other teachers. Tactile letters, so children form letter shapes out of clay. They can trace over sandpaper letters you've created. Magnetic letters, those are just examples. Let's connect to our state guidelines so we can make sure that our curriculum is aligned with the TEKS here in Texas. And here's a little bit on Focus on Phonics. And so beginning first grade, typically we want students to know the names, letter identification, and represented in English, for instance. And we also want them to know upper and lowercase and be able to sequence the letters of the alphabet. And it gets more technical. So within phonics, students use the relationships between letter sounds, spelling patterns, and morphological analysis to decode in English. And morphological would just refer to small units of meaning in a word, like a prefix, suffix, or root word that students can look for. That also lends itself to talking about vocabulary, when you can look at meaning parts in a word. We always want to teach in context, so talking about word meanings would also be associated with teaching of phonics. And you can see that it gets kind of technical, so decoding words in context and in isolation, using these correspondences, simple consonants, vowels, blends, digraphs, vowel digraphs, and vowel diphthongs. So you need to know what these are before you teach in, for instance, first grade or any grade where students are just beginning to read. A couple quotes to end with. Phonics is a mean to an end, not the end in itself, and the best context for learning and applying phonics is actual reading and writing. Dorothy Strickland. A couple of references, Marilyn Adams, O'Connor, Stephen Stahl, and Dorothy Strickland. So I really recommend the last book, especially for new teachers or teachers looking for a resource that just helps them learn more about phonics. It's a quick read, and Dorothy Strickland is a well-known scholar in literacy, but they're all good reads, so recommended. That's it.